Hey everybody, welcome back to the next part in my how to create a quick great tone. Today's topic is going to be all about how to set up our delays. So without further ado, let's jump over to HX Edit and take a look. So I have a very simple preset here with a Fullerton norm stock settings, I believe. I might have brought the drive down a little bit. Going into a simple delay at these stock settings that we have when it comes up. So what does this sound like? Here's what we have. Might not be exactly what we're looking for. So some folks might look at this and not understand what these controls do. So let's go step by step through the controls and what they do on a delay. So the time, we have two settings possible here. We have it set as time, which is going to be measured in milliseconds or seconds. It comes up at 800 or so milliseconds. We can also toggle that to note sync, which means it's going to repeat in the time of whatever note value we have set and the tempo up here in the right hand corner. I'm at 120 beats per minute. This is going to delay repeat every quarter note, so basically 2 times per second. What's the right way to set this? Well, we can set it in milliseconds so that if we hit a note, 770 milliseconds later, the note is going to repeat. Or if I set it to quarter notes, like I said, it's going. Now what we're hearing is some bouncing here. We're going to talk about that in a second. So it's really up to us. My thing is that I almost always set to note sync, okay? I don't like dealing in milliseconds unless there's a very specific reason, sometimes for a slapback effect or things like that. So there are some reasons to, but I like to have my delays in time with the tempo. If I'm playing live, I'm constantly over tapping the tempo if it's changing with the band. In the studio, if we're at a fixed tempo, I set up here, I just right click that, I can type in whatever I want for that tempo and it matches the song. Now my delayed repeats are going to kind of blend nicer with the actual music, and I personally find that it's more musical. So that's one of my biggest tips, is to always time your notes in time with the song you're playing, whether using tap tempo or the tempo up there. Now we can change this to half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, whatever. We'll come back and talk about this in a second. I'll leave it a quarter note for now. What is feedback going to do? Well, feedback, and let me just bring my scale up to 100 here for a second. Feedback is going to tell us how many delayed repeats or echoes we're going to get. If I set that down to 0, basically at 1. If I set it around 50%, I get more repeats. If I set that to 100, we end up with this endless feedback loop, which can be really cool for some effects. We could assign that to an expression pedal and kind of go in and out of that. It's kind of cool stuff. So that's what the feedback's going to do. Mix is very simple. If we have the mix on 0, we're going to get nothing but dry signal. Okay, if we have the mix on 100, we're not going to get any dry signal. We're going to get all wet repeated signals. So you won't even hear your initial note. If we set it around 50%, it's going to mix the dry and the wet signal. Somewhere around equal, okay? The level is just simply how much output volume we're going to have coming out so we can gain stage this in a manner that we need to. I just got more volume out of it. Usually that's going to be left at 0 unless it's going to be for a specific reason. Scale is an interesting control. Scale at 100% basically turns this stereo delay, and that's the thing, this is a stereo block, as we can see with the 2 circles here, okay? If I go to a mono delay here, all that happens is all this controls stay the same except the scale goes away. But what we're doing here with scale at 100% is basically just sounding like a mono delay. Okay, everything's straight up the middle. If I bring that down to 75%, let's say, what's going to happen now is I'm going to get my note sync value of a quarter note happening over here in my left-hand speaker. But, actually, let's do this for easier math. Let's go to 50%. Listen what happens. We get a note that's twice as fast repeat over in our right-hand speaker sooner. So we get like an eighth note over here, and then we get our quarter note over here with the feedback that we had set, okay? 75. So the lower we bring our scale, the faster we get a repeat in relation to our settings over in our right-hand speaker. Almost a slapback effect in the right-hand speaker. You're only going to hear this if you're listening in stereo. And then we go back to our quarter notes over here. And then if we go over scale down to 0, it's almost instant. It's almost like a doubling effect in this speaker. And then we get our normal quarter note over there. So by setting this to 100%, we're really just in mono. There's nothing stereo about this effect anymore. Okay, if I want a little bit of stereo effect, keep in mind though, setting your scale different can affect the timing if we're trying to lock to the song. Trails is very simple. If I have it off, if I turn the effect off with a long feedback, let's use this, it just cuts off. With trails on, when I turn the effect off, it keeps trailing on. Okay, so what are some of my favorite settings? Well, a lot of times, depending on the tempo, I'll set to either a quarter note or an eighth note. Okay, let's see what a quarter. I'll set my feedback usually in and around somewhere between, say, 25–30%, and my mix somewhere down maybe between 25 and 30% too for a little lead tone. Now, obviously, that's a very subtle delay. If you want more feedback, maybe we bump that up and we bring our mix down a bit. The more feedback we have, the more the notes are going to repeat and kind of walk on top of the next things we do. The more mix we have, the less direct signal we're going to have, right? So if we bring that mix way up, and I find a mistake a lot of folks make is they bring their mix too high to maybe make it easier to play and to cover up some sloppy playing. But if our mix is too high, if we're playing notes the delayed repeats actually end up kind of engulfing the notes we're playing at the moment. So the notes we played a moment ago are now engulfing the notes we played are playing right now, which might be okay, but a lot of times it might muddy things up. So if you find your delays are kind of muddying things up, bring your mix control back a bit, you know, and see if that works better. Okay, so those settings work nice. Now, the nice thing about the note sync setting is if I set it to something like a dotted eighth note, feedback on 0, mix on 50%, and scale on 100%, we can get these kind of cool rhythmic ideas going. And the idea there is that I'm hitting a note, I'm hitting another note in an eighth note, and then the dotted eighth note happens after that. So I end up with an eighth note and then the sound of like 2 16th notes. It has to be timed perfectly to the tempo. It's much easier if you're playing with a click too to kind of get that locked in. Now, the other thing I want to talk about though are some effects with special kind of modulation and whatnot added to it. So if you take something like the transistor tape, now I've done dedicated videos in depth with things like the transistor tape, the duck delay, the vintage delay. So this is not about going super in depth, but if you see here we have wow and flutter and spread. Those are the two different controls we have. Well, if we crank the wow and flutter up, and I'm going to bring the mix up to 100% so we can hear that. Bring wow and flutter down. The notes become, on the repeats, become unstable. Now the big question is, people say, does this affect our direct signal? No, it doesn't, not at all. So if I turn the mix down, it doesn't affect that direct signal. It's only going to affect the delayed repeats. So any of these kind of modulation style effects that are part of a delay only affect the repeats, not our direct signal. The spread is going to tell us how wide that wow and flutter is going to sound across the stereo spectrum. So listen to this. We hear a bit of it. Now watch what happens when I go here. If we're listening in stereo, you're going to hear more of a stereo swirl kind of with it. But everything else is going to be the same. All right, that was a really quick look, guys. Like I said, I have dedicated videos to delay, I believe, a transistor tape, a vintage digital, one for our duct delay, which I believe is a TC Electronics 2290 model. Go look at those videos. I'll have links to those in the description below if you want to really dive in depth into the functions here. But for those who wanted a quick video just to kind of understand a little bit more how to dial in our delays quickly, effortlessly, and kind of almost instinctively knowing what our settings are going to do before we even try them, this is the video that I wanted to put out for that. So I hope it was helpful. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would get use out of it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I will be back really soon with some more content, some exciting stuff coming up. Thanks so much again for tuning in, guys, and ciao for now.